You say you've moved on, but every time her name lights up in your head, your chest tightens. You replay the memories, not because you miss her, but because you're still trying to make sense of why you weren't enough. You haven't reached out. You haven't begged. You've stayed silent, thinking that's strength, thinking that's power. But silence doesn't mean peace when your mind is still screaming her name. And the hardest truth to admit is this: you're not being stoic. You're just hiding your ache in stillness, hoping she'll hear it. Punchline. That's not healing. That's heartbreak waiting with its mouth closed. You've been told that silence is strength, that not reaching out means you've won. But if your chest still aches, if your mind still waits, then the silence isn't peace. It's prison. This matters because too many men confuse emotional suppression with healing. You don't need to be louder. You need to be honest with yourself, with the patterns, with the pain that still owns you in the quiet. This isn't about getting her back. It's about getting you back. Not the version that performed strength, but the version that lives it. Comment below. I don't chase what walked away. Number 1, stillness isn't strength if it's fueled by hope. You call it peace, but your chest is still tight. That's not silence. That's suspense. You sit in the quiet, not because you're at peace, but because you're waiting for a message, waiting for her to change her mind, waiting for that little buzz on your phone to say she regrets it, misses you, still cares. You haven't reached out, you haven't begged, you've stayed silent, and maybe you're proud of that. You think it makes you stronger, makes you seem unbothered, stoic, unshakable. But inside, you're still watching the door, still hoping it opens, and that's the lie, because silence isn't always strength. Sometimes it's just the mask you wear over your anxiety. Sometimes it's the prison you lock yourself in, hoping she's the one with the key. You tell yourself, I'm not chasing. But if your heart still runs after her every night in your thoughts, if your mind rewrites every moment, every word, every what if, you're not still, you're stuck. There's a difference. Real stillness, real peace comes when you stop waiting. Not because she finally texted back, but because you finally stopped checking. Because here's what most men don't realize: silence, when it's rooted in hope, becomes a form of begging. You may not be using words, but your energy is still loud. Your soul is still pleading. Hope is seductive. It disguises itself as patience, as faith, as strength. But it's none of those things when it's tied to someone else's will, because the truth is, you're not hoping for a miracle. You're hoping to avoid the pain of finality. You're hoping she gives you permission to move on. But you don't need her permission. You never did. And every moment you sit in that quiet, waiting for her voice, you give her power she didn't even ask for. This isn't strength. This is suspense, and it's killing your clarity. Ask yourself, what are you actually afraid of? That she doesn't care anymore, that she's already forgotten you, that your silence doesn't hurt her the way hers hurts you. Good. Let it hurt. Let it burn through the illusion that silence is some kind of test you're passing, because power isn't found in how long you can hold your breath. It's found in when you finally exhale, not with a message from her, but with the realization that you've been holding your breath for the wrong person. Stoicism isn't about silence. It's about detachment. It's not about proving you don't care. It's about not needing her to care at all. She made her decision. Now you make yours. You stop hoping. You stop checking. You stop waiting for the text that will never undo what's been done. Because hope, when It's not rooted in reality, isn't courage. It's fear, dressed in a suit of false calm. So breathe. Not because she finally reached out, but because you're done holding yourself hostage with hope. Final truth. Hope is not a healing strategy. It's the handcuff you put on yourself, and today you unlock it. Number 2, you don't want her back, you want validation. You're not missing her arms. You're missing the mirror you used to see yourself in. Let's be honest. You don't want her. Not really. You want what she made you feel. You want that reflection of yourself, when she looked at you like you mattered, when you were enough, when her eyes made you feel seen. Maybe for the first time in a long time. Now that she's gone, it's not her laughter you replay. It's that feeling, that sense of worth you borrowed from her affection. The approval you lived on like oxygen. You're not yearning for her return. You're starving for the version of yourself you felt when she loved you. And that's what stings the most. Not the loss of her, but the loss of you through her. So when you sit there, silent, hoping, aching, when you imagine her coming back, what you really want is proof that you still matter. Proof that you weren't disposable. That you're still enough, even after she stopped choosing you. But think about that for a second. What does it say about your self-worth, if it only lives in the echo of her validation? If her silence is the only measure you're using to calculate your value, you don't want her. You want to not feel rejected. You want to erase the feeling that you weren't good enough to stay. You want to rewrite the ending, so you don't have to sit in the shame of being left. But here's the hard truth. If your sense of self rises and falls with someone else's desire for you, you've outsourced your identity. You've handed over the keys to your peace to someone who already walked away. That's not love, that's addiction, that's ego, begging for reassurance. You thought she was home, but really she was just a shelter you built on shifting ground. And when she left, the structure collapsed, because it was never truly yours. It was borrowed confidence, conditional belonging. And now you're standing in the ruins, calling it heartbreak. But it's not heartbreak, it's identity loss. So what do you do now? You stop begging for reflections in broken mirrors. You stop trying to win back someone who already voted with their absence. You stop letting your worth hang in the balance of another person's choice. And instead, you rebuild, slowly, quietly, not to prove anything to her, but to remember who you were before you tried to become what she wanted, to remember that your value is not up for negotiation, not anymore. That's the Stoic truth. You are not what she thinks of you. You are not the ending she wrote, and you are not the rejection that still echoes in your chest. You are the one who chooses how this story continues, with or without her. So stop romanticizing the return, because the fantasy you're chasing isn't her, it's validation. And if you ever get it, it'll only feel good for a moment. Then the emptiness returns, because borrowed worth always runs out. Real love, real self-respect starts when you no longer need her to come back to feel whole. Final truth, this isn't love, it's ego wrapped in regret, and you're ready to let both go. Number 3. Silence used as a test will always fail you. You didn't go quiet for your peace. You went quiet for her reaction. And that's not healing. That's hiding. You say you're done. You say you're detached. You say you've accepted it. But deep down, you're still watching the clock, Still counting the days since you heard from her, still holding your breath every time your phone lights up, still hoping her name appears in the glow of your screen like some kind of resurrection. You didn't block her, didn't beg, didn't chase. You walked away, quietly. And on the outside, that looks like strength. But on the inside, it's a strategy, a test, a trap you set. Not for her, but for yourself. Because if you're honest, this silence isn't about healing, it's bait. You're not trying to move on. You're trying to get her to flinch, to fold, to feel your absence so deeply she has to come back. And when she doesn't, you spiral, because your worth was tied to a reaction that never came. This isn't power. It's performance. It's emotional manipulation, dressed up as self-respect. But here's the truth you don't want to face. If your silence is a test, you've already failed it, because peace doesn't require an audience, and healing isn't something you prove, it's something you choose. The psychology behind it makes sense. You're hurting. You want to matter. You want her to notice. You think that if she texts you, if she reaches out first, it means you still hold weight in her world, that you're not so easily replaced, that she regrets leaving, that somewhere in the middle of her busy, happy life, she still misses you. But the need for that confirmation is the very thing keeping you from real peace, because as long as you're waiting for her to validate your pain, you haven't taken responsibility for it. You're still outsourcing your worth to someone who's already moved on. That's not healing, that's dependency, and it's disguised as detachment. True detachment doesn't care who texts first. It doesn't wait for proof. It doesn't measure progress by whether or not she misses you. It just moves forward, quietly, clearly, fully. That's what the Stoics understood. The world can't give you peace, only you can. And if it can be broken by someone else's silence, it was never real peace to begin with. So ask yourself this: are you silent because you've accepted the truth, or because you're still hoping to provoke a response? If it's the second, you're not detached, you're emotionally gambling, and every day you go without a message, you're reinforcing the lie that you weren't enough to miss. But let me say this slowly because it matters. Her silence is not a statement about your worth. It's a reflection of her path, and her path is no longer your business. When you finally stop checking, when you finally stop hoping, when you finally stop weaponizing your silence as a test, that's when you're free. Not because she reached out, but because you no longer needed her to. Final truth: if it needs to be proven to her, it hasn't been accepted by you, and your peace doesn't need proof. Number 4. You're not waiting for her, you're avoiding yourself. You say you're giving it time, but what you're really doing is running from the mirror. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat alone, truly alone, with nothing but your own thoughts, your own memories, your own breath? No distractions, no scrolling, no just checking in with her profile, no fantasizing about her return, just you, unfiltered, unnumbed, unshielded. If the thought of that still tightens your chest, this isn't about her anymore. It's about you, because the hardest thing a man can face isn't losing her. It's meeting himself in the silence that follows. And most men don't. They wait, not because they're patient, but because they're terrified. Terrified of what rises when the noise fades, terrified of what they'll find in the quiet. You're not waiting for her, you're avoiding you. You've made her the distraction, the placeholder, The ghost you chase so you don't have to sit with your own, because here's what happens after heartbreak. You stop calling it heartbreak. You start calling it hope. You start calling it silence. You start calling it space. But those are just softer words for hiding, because you're not healing in this waiting. You're freezing, emotionally frozen in a loop that feels like strength, but smells like fear. And it makes sense, because facing yourself after a breakup is brutal. It means confronting the role you played, the red flags you ignored, the parts of yourself you gave up just to feel loved. It means admitting how much of your identity was built around being needed, and how lost you feel now that you're not. You see, it was never really her leaving that broke you. It was what she took with her when she did, the image of yourself as wanted, as chosen, as seen. And now, without her gaze to reflect you back to yourself, you don't know who you are. So instead of asking, "Who am I now?" you ask, "Will she come back? Will she come?" Because that question, as painful as it is easier. It's easier to hope than to rebuild, easier to fantasize than to feel, easier to wait for her to fix the story than to start writing a new one yourself. But here's the Stoic truth. No one is coming to rescue you from your own silence. You have to sit in it. You have to go into the storm, not around it, not above it, through it, because silence isn't your enemy. Avoidance is when you finally turn inward, when you finally stop making her the center of your thoughts and start asking what you've been avoiding inside yourself. That's when healing begins. Not the kind that needs closure, not the kind that needs answers, the kind that feels like standing up straighter, sleeping a little deeper, looking in the mirror and not flinching, because in that silence, you'll find the boy who never felt seen. You'll find the man who tied his worth to being needed, and then you'll find the power to let both go. This isn't about getting over her. This is about getting into you, your fear, your grief, your truth. And from that place, from that fire, you rise, not bitter, not cold, but whole. Final truth. Healing starts when the silence turns inward, and you've been silent long enough. Number 5, no response is a response. You keep checking for a signal, but the silence is already the message. You tell yourself maybe she's just busy, maybe she's thinking, maybe she needs time to process, maybe she's just waiting for the right moment to reach out. You replay the last conversation in your head like it holds some secret code. You analyze her last text like it's scripture. You look for subtext, signs, signals, anything that suggests this isn't over, because the silence feels impossible to believe, like love can't just end without a word, but it can, and it does. And here's the part you haven't accepted yet. Her silence is not confusion, it's not hesitation, it's not a maybe, it's an answer, the one you don't want, but the one you've already been given. Because when someone wants you, you know. When someone is unsure, you feel it. But when someone is gone, there's just silence, no closure, no apology, no breadcrumb, just absence. A cold, quiet space where affection used to be. You keep asking what it means that she hasn't reached out. It means exactly what you fear. She moved on, she detached, she's no longer where you thought she was, emotionally. And that's not something you failed to fix. That's just something she chose to let go. And I know it's brutal, because we're not built to accept endings that come without explanation. We crave reasons, we crave closure. We want someone to say, "This is why I stopped loving you." as if that would make it easier. But it wouldn't. It's not the silence that hurts the most, it's the hoping inside the silence, the waiting, the mental gymnastics, the endless rationalizing. She must be scared. She probably doesn't want to seem too eager. Maybe she's testing me to see if I'll reach out first. No, she's just not reaching out, and you have to stop making that mean more than it does, because every moment you spend decoding her absence is a moment you betray your own presence. Every hour you give to wondering why she's quiet is an hour you lose reconnecting with your own strength. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. If she wanted to, she would have. It's that simple. It's that clear. And it's that painful. But sometimes the clearest messages come without words, and that silence you keep analyzing. It's not vague. It's not unclear. It's loud. Louder than any message you could receive. It's saying, I'm done. And whether you like it or not, that's your closure. You don't need a conversation to heal. You don't need a reason to move forward. You only need the truth. And the truth is, her absence is the answer. The final period at the end of the chapter you've been trying to keep open. So what do you do now? You stop chasing clarity from someone who already walked away from it. You stop waiting for words she never intended to say. You stop hoping that maybe, somehow, silence still means she cares. It doesn't. It means she's gone. And it's time for you to be gone too, not with bitterness, not with rage, but with a quiet power that says, I heard the message you never sent, and I'm no longer waiting for an echo. Final truth. The silence you're analyzing is your answer, in all caps, and it's time to stop reading into it and start walking away from it. Number 6. Power is in what you no longer react to. Real strength isn't in what you say, it's in what no longer gets a rise out of you. You want to prove something. To her, to yourself, to the story still stuck in your chest. You think, maybe if you say it right, she'll finally understand. If you cut her off the right way, block her at just the right moment, write one last message that drips with dignity and finality, maybe then you'll feel powerful again. But deep down, you know the truth. Power doesn't come from the reaction, it comes from the release, and that's the part you're resisting. Because reacting feels like taking control. It feels like you're doing something. It gives you a moment of emotional gravity, like you're pulling the center of the story back to you. But it's temporary, fleeting, because real power doesn't demand attention. It doesn't ask to be seen, it simply is. Look at where your energy has been going, into watching her stories, even though you know it breaks you, into reading old messages, searching for clues like their gospel, into playing pretend, posting, performing, hoping she notices. But here's the reality. If you still need her to notice, you're not free. If you still hope she regrets losing you, you're not healed. If your peace still requires her silence to scream back at you, you haven't stepped into your power yet. You don't need to block her, not out of spite, not to make a statement. You need something quieter than that, something cleaner. You need distance without a message, space without performance. You need to let go in a way that doesn't look like control, because it's not about control anymore. It's about peace. That's what the Stoics understood. Control over others is an illusion. Control over self. That's where the fire is. That's where the freedom lives. So, when you stop reacting, when her silence no longer stings, when her presence online doesn't shift your heart rate, when you can see her name and feel nothing, that's when the real work has done its job. Not because you erased the memory, but because you outgrew the wound. She no longer gets to live rent-free in your nervous system. She no longer owns a piece of your peace. You've moved from trying to be seen to being okay if you're never seen again. Because you see yourself now, fully, quietly, unshakably. That's power. Not the kind that screams, not the kind that slams doors, but the kind that walks away with nothing left to prove. You don't need closure. You don't need a grand finale. You just need to stop giving your energy to what no longer feeds you. That's it. Because when you no longer need her to feel loss, you've truly healed. And when you no longer need her to validate what you meant, you've already reclaimed your meaning. The moment you stop needing her to finish the sentence, you become the ending yourself. Final truth. The moment you stop needing closure is the moment you become it. And no one, not even her, can take that from you. Number 7. Healing is giving up the fantasy. You're not mourning her. You're mourning the life you built in your mind with someone who never lived up to it. There's a moment after it ends when the silence feels worse than the breakup itself, not because of her absence, but because of the collapse of the life you imagined with her, the one you carried in your chest like a promise, the version of the future that never even had a chance to breathe. You weren't just in love with her, you were in love with the fantasy, and that is the part that haunts you, because the fantasy was perfect. It had no arguments, no betrayal, no distance. It was the version of her who would never hurt you, the one who always chose you, the one who made sense in the world you wanted to believe in. And that's why it's so hard to let go, not of the reality that was, but of the illusion you held on to. You keep telling yourself, we had something real. But did you? Or were you just deeply invested in the potential of what it could have been? That's the trap. That's the quiet lie. Fantasy doesn't need truth to survive, just hope. And you kept feeding it. Every time she showed you a glimpse of love, you filled in the rest with your imagination. You overlooked the emotional unavailability. You forgave the inconsistencies. You painted over red flags with, maybe she's just scared. Maybe she'll grow. Maybe I can be enough to fix this. But you can't build a future on maybes. You can't heal by clinging to the blueprint of a life that only existed in your head. And the longer you hold on to the fantasy, the longer you stay frozen in a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore either. Because here's the truth, you didn't just lose her. You lost the version of you that existed only in relation to her. The man who needed her to feel whole. The man who built castles on conversations, on chemistry, on potential, that man is gone. And that's a good thing. The fantasy was never your peace. It was your pause. It kept you from seeing clearly. It kept you from confronting the truth. It kept you dreaming when you needed to wake up. And now you're waking up. This part, this grief you're feeling isn't about love lost. It's about identity lost. And that's why it's so confusing. Because you think you're missing her. But what you're really missing is the man you thought you were when she was in your life. Let him go. Let the version of her go. Let the version of your future go. And when the dust clears, when the fantasy finally dissolves, you'll be left with something far more solid, reality. And from reality, you rebuild, not with dreams, not with delusions, but with discernment, with clarity, with stillness. That's healing. Not rewriting the story so it hurts less, but accepting that the story was never going to end the way you wanted it. And that's okay, because maybe that future wasn't stolen from you. Maybe it was never meant for you. Maybe life wasn't breaking you down. It was redirecting you back to yourself, back to truth, back to a love that doesn't require imagination to feel real. So stop mourning what was never yours. Stop waiting for the fantasy to resurrect. It won't. And you don't need it to, because peace doesn't live in the future you once created. It lives in the present you finally come home to. Final truth. She wasn't your peace. She was your pause. And now, it's time to press play on the life that's actually yours. You've walked through the fire, not the loud kind that burns bridges, but the slow one, the quiet one, the kind that eats you from the inside until all that's left is the question, who am I now that she's gone? But here's the truth. You were never hers to lose. You were always yours to find, and this pain, as sharp as it is, has given you something most men never earn. Clarity. You don't check the phone anymore, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring for yourself. You've stopped rehearsing what you'd say if she came back, because you've realized peace doesn't need a performance, it just needs presence. This isn't about being cold, it's about being clean, clear, detached from the outcome. Because your worth no longer lives in someone else's attention, you've learned that healing isn't getting her back. It's getting yourself back. Not the version that begged, not the one that waited, but the version who stands tall in his own silence. Not as a test, but as truth. So now, you move differently, not louder, just lighter. You don't chase, you don't prove, you don't flinch, because the man who once waited for a message has become the message. Comment, I am not who I used to be. Subscribe if you're walking away in silence, not to prove a point, but to protect your peace.